بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إن شئت سهلا اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So inshallah we're going to continue with our session on Abu Bakr Al-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. And this is our 6th session, and we have 2 more after this. It's good? Yeah. Okay. And so this session will be on Iraq. And in general, the conquest, the beginning, the conquest part of the Sirah of Abu Bakr Al-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, beginning with Iraq, and then next week Syria, and then concluding with the death of Abu Bakr and some of those events around that. But before we get into the conquest of Iraq and the key battles, it's very important to contextualize first that why is it such a significant factor, or why is it so important that we see in Muslim history, especially with Abu Bakr, and we'll see in the next session with Umar radiallahu anhu, that there was this, and of course with the Khulafa Rashidin in general, but there was this huge expansion of the Muslim lands and the Muslim conquests. And of course this ties in with the concept of jihad. And so jihad, we have defensive and offensive, and the conquest that we're speaking about right now fall under offensive jihad. And so it's important to phrase as context before getting into this that these battles that are being fought by the Muslims were instigated and started by the Muslims. These were not battles that the Muslims were forced into, or the Persians were the ones on the offensive, and so they're the ones who forced all of these battles that we're going to speak about in the encounters with Abu Bakr Al-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Rather, it's the opposite. And we'll see how Abu Bakr opens up fronts in Iraq and opens up fronts in Asham, and on the Muslims continue until they defeat Persia and Rome, and they become the superpower of the world. And now, if we ask the question though, why is this necessary? Does the deen, is this first of all, is this part of the deen? Is this really what Islam, is this something that Islam obligates? And then number 2, why? And is this clear? And so first, we see the hadith of Rasoolullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where he sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أُقَاتِلَ النَّاسِ حتى يشهدوا أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة فإذا فعلوا ذلك عصموا مني دماءهم وأموالهم إلا بحق الإسلام وحسابهم على الله تعالى. A very long hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says that I have been commanded to fight the people until they say La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah, and they establish the salah and they give the zakah. And if they do that, then they have protected from me their lives and their wealth and their blood, except with that which Islam has a right over, and their accountability is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, not only that, of course we have many ayat in ahadith, but what's very interesting is to look back at the beginning of what we started with these sessions, talking about Abu Bakr Al-Siddiq radiallahu anhu speaking in front of Mecca, and how Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, with Abu Bakr, they used to go and speak to the tribes. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to tell the people in Mecca, kalimatan, that if you say one word, تَدِينُ لَكُمْ بِهِ الْعَرَبُ وَالْعَجَمُ, that the Arab and non-Arabs will all come under your dominion. If you say this one word, that when Abu Bakr Al-Siddiq radiallahu anhu and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to go and speak to the tribes, they used to tell them clearly that we're looking for military support because this is going to be an Islamic state, which is going to need to defend its borders and expand. And so this was very, very clear from day one. And even more narrations about Rasulullah ﷺ giving glad tidings, and even, these moments of hardship all the way from Mecca, about how, Wallahi la yutimmanna Allah hadha al-amr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala verily will make sure and gives success or victory to this command, to this deen. حتى يصير الراكب من صنعاء إلى حضرموت لا يخاف إلا الله والذئب على غنمه, until the rider will go from Sana'a all the way to Hadramaut, from one end to the other end, and he does not fear except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the wolves on his sheep. إن الله زوى لي الأرض فرأيت مشارقها ومغاربها وإن ملك أمتي سيبلغ ما زوي لي منها. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has casted in front of me the entire earth from the east to the west. This is Rasoolullah saying this. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Rasulullah and Rasulullah is informing us that the kingship or the dominion or the authority of Islam, of this ummah, will spread all across what Rasulullah was shown, which is the entire earth. And so the conquest that we're discussing right now, these are just parts of the conquest that are to come, where the entire earth will come under Islam. And now it's also very important to look at the word conquest, right? And again, conquest these days has a very negative connotation. It's used in a way where it's plundering, where what we see today of empires coming in and usurping all the wealth in a certain land, taking their people as slaves, colonization recently, in recent history. These are all terms that come with them, belittling of people and taking away their wealth and to an extent their lives, and enforcing upon them these harsh circumstances. And so the Islamic conquest, or futuhat in Arabic, and futuhat means openings or liberations, you can say, were very, very different. And one of the Rustum, who was one of the generals of Persia, he had asked Rabi' ibn Amir, one of the Sahabah, that what is bringing you guys over here? That you guys were in your peninsula. What's bringing you guys to come and fight us? Why? Where is all this motivation coming from? And Rabi' radiallahu anhu, he says, "Inna Allah ibta'athana linukhrij al-ibad min ibadati al-ibad ila ibadati rabbil ibad." That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent us to remove or exit the people, the slaves, from worshipping other slaves to worshipping the Lord of the slaves. وَمِن ضَيْقِ الدُّنْيَا وَمِن جَوْرِ الْأَدْيَانِ إِلَى عَدْلِ الْإِسْلَامِ. And from the oppression in the tyranny of all the different religions to the justice of Islam. وَمِن ضَيْقِ الدُّنْيَا إِلَى سَعَةِ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ. And from the constricted nature of this dunya to the vastness of this dunya and the akhirah. And so there's a lot that is very, very important to unpack here. That Rabi' radiallahu anh, he's saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us, the servants, to stop the people from worshipping and serving each other. That the people, they used to worship other people. And this is what Rabi' is saying. And of course, we have to remember the story of Adi ibn Hatim radiallahu anh, before, when he was still a Christian, how Rasulullah said to him that اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله, that they took their rabbis and their monks as lords other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Adi ibn Hatim radiallahu anh, at this point, he had thought that this was the opportunity. Rasulullah has finally said something wrong that he can correct, and he says, no, we didn't take them as our lords. They are just scholars. And so Rasulullah asked him that, did they not make halal and haram for you? Meaning, did they not legislate and say, this is what's allowed, this is what's legal, this is what's illegal? And he said, yes. And Rasulullah said, this is the ibadah. This is the ibadah. And so Rabi' ibn Amir is saying that the mission of Islam, inna Allah ibta'athana, that why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us here to do this, is to stop people from worshipping each other into worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then notice the second part of his statement, وَمِن جَوْرِ الْأَدْيَانِ, and from the oppression and tyranny of every single other religion to the justice of Islam. And so this, unfortunately, these days we don't repeat this enough, or we don't have this aqeedah concept firm in our minds that Islam did not come to coexist. Islam لا يعلى. Al-Islam يعلو ولا يعلى عليه. Islam is raised high and nothing is raised above Islam. We can't think of Islam that it came to live with these other religions, in the sense that Islam is a religion amongst those religions, and they have a share with the truth, and they have a share of justice, and they have a share of, this worship of Allah, the correct worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Islam came to correct all of that. Islam came to remove the oppression of all those religions, and it is the only truth, and it is the only way to justice. So Rabi'i is saying, ideologically, Islam has come to erase from power, and notice the beginning of the first statement he said, from ibadat al-ibad, from worshipping the slaves, right? From these systems that were applied of the empires they had back then, of kingship. And later we see with the Crusaders, etc. You see a long history of non-Islamic civilizations whose systems from the Islamic perspective are oppressive. And the only way to bring justice is through Islam. And then also from the constrictedness of this dunya to the vastness of this dunya and the akhirah. And one last ayah before we continue to emphasize this point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allahu waliyyu alladhina amanu yukhrijuhum min al-dhulumati ila an-nur walladhina kafaru awliya'uhum at-taghut yukhrijunahum min an-nur ila adh-dhulumat ulaika ashabun nar hum fiha khalidun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He is, the wali, or the protector, close friend, etc., of those who believe, and He removes them from al-dhulumati ila an-nur, from the darknesses, and here darkness is plural, the darknesses, ila nur, to the one light. So from all the oppressive different religions and the oppressive ways of life on this earth, to the light of Islam. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْلِيَاءُهُمُ الطَّاغُوتُ يُخْرِجُونَهُمْ مِنَ النُّورِ إِلَى الظُّلُمَاتِ. And those who disbelieve, their close friend, protectors, etc., their allies, are the taghut, which is anything that is worshipped, or anyone who rules other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed. Anyone who worships other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is taghut. And these taghut could take the form of, again, like for example, the example we were mentioning before with Rasoolullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and Adi ibn Hatim before he became Muslim, of the Christians taking their rabbi or their monks and their scholars as people who were being quote unquote worshipped here. That's a form. Another form is the kings who used to rule over the people. This is another form of taghut. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that these taghut take people from the light, again singular, and nur, to where? Ila dhulumat, to all of the different types of darknesses. Ulaika ashabun nar, and those who do that, they are, the people of the fire. Hum fiha khalidun, they will be there everlasting. And so again, this concept needs to be very, very clear in the minds of all of us today. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent us with this deen to spread it to the people and to carry it to the people. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this light, we have to spread it to the rest of the people. And now, a very, very important point to also mention is the manner in that the Islamic conquests were carried out, and then also the reaction of the people. And this is something that we're going to see progressively as we go through Abu Bakr, and beginning with the conquest of Iraq. And so we'll kind of start with this, and we'll continue to emphasize this point so that it's very, very clear by the end of the lecture, inshallah. And so Abu Bakr Al-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he started implementing a plan that had been drawn out by Rasoolullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam previously for the conquest of Iraq. And again, this is an important point to mention as well, that Rasoolullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is himself, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the one who started sending out all these letters, explaining to the different kings that you should accept Islam. And if you accept Islam, you'll have the good deeds of you and all your people combined. And if you don't, then you should pay the jizya. And if not, then you are choosing war, and the Muslims will come to you. And so, Abu Bakr had assigned two armies, and the first one was under the leadership of Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu. And again, this was after finishing dealing with the apostates. And so Abu Bakr ordered Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu to go into Iraq from the southwest. And notice Abu Bakr, when he told Khalid these instructions, he also mentioned to him to make sure to be kind to the people, the common people, and call them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if they respond, that would be amazing. That would be best. And then, if the people refuse, then ask them to pay jizya and take the jizya from them. If they also refuse that, then he should fight them. And so, we'll see obviously in towards the end of the battle that we'll mention today, one of the bigger battles between Khalid and the Persians. We'll see the reaction of the people, the people who were under the control of the Persians, when Khalid radiallahu anh came in and, of course, defeated the Persian army. And now another detail I also mentioned last week, which is that Abu Bakr radiallahu anh had instructed Khalid bin Walid not to seek help from anyone who had apostated or supported the apostates from before. And so, again, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh understood the concept very, very clearly. That Islam, when you try to weigh the odds of success, or you try to weigh, if this army will be successful against another army, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh knows the only weight that matters in this is Iman. And of course, those who have Iman are those who also will prepare, who will prepare themselves with numbers, with weapons, etc. But the focus wasn't on getting the biggest amount he could. Nor was the focus ever the huge difference in the number of Muslims, of course, in a lesser manner where there's less Muslims than the opposing enemy. And this is something that, if you read the Islamic history, this is always, the Muslims were always in a position, again, most of the time, where they were less, and they were, in terms of numbers, less. And so Abu Bakr mentioned this first, and then also mentioned that he should not force anyone to march with him, even if the person is available, etc. Then Khalid was commanded not to force anyone to come with him and go out into these battles. And again, this is because the nature, from a fiqhi perspective, of jihad talab, of offensive jihad, that this is an obligation according to the capacity. And so, if the capacity is there, then there's no need, you're not allowed to force, it's not an obligation to force the people, again, with the Amir having this option in hand. And so, the second army that was sent by Abu Bakr was by Riyadh, and this was between Hijaz, and he told him to enter Iraq from the top. And so, essentially, Khalid and Riyadh are entering from two opposite perspectives into Iraq. And he was told to, again, meet up with Khalid, and then once he meets up with Khalid, radiallahu anhu, then Khalid was the Amir of the army. And again, also an emphasis was made again on not to take anyone who's reluctant and not to force anyone who's reluctant. So even if anyone has any hesitations, then that's okay, just leave them behind. And now another important detail is another army that was sent was Al-Muthanna, was under the command of Al-Muthanna bin Harith al-Shaybani. And he actually had came to Abu Bakr As-Siddiq radiallahu anhu and encouraged Abu Bakr to fight the Persians, and was asking Abu Bakr to send him to go and fight the Persians. And if we take a second and remember back in the second or third session where we mentioned this name, Al-Muthanna bin Harith al-Shaybani, he was amongst Banu Shayban, when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr had went and spoke to them and asked them for nusra, asked them for support. And eventually, of course, the Muslims end up in Medina with the support of the Ansar from the Aus and Khazraj. But when they had spoken to Banu Shayban, they had not given a bad response, as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. But what they had said was that, look, we have, a contract or an agreement with the Persians, and the Persians, they're very strict, and they don't forgive. And so if we turn away from this contract or fight against the Persians, this is too much for us. We can't do this. And so Al-Muthanna bin Harith al-Shaybani was there, and he spoke in that discussion. And again, he was the military commander of Banu Shayban. And this is their response to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that we will fight against anyone except the Persians. And then subhanAllah, the one who is encouraging and is looking to lead the Muslims against the Persians is Al-Muthanna bin Harith al-Shaybani himself, after he accepted Islam. And so again, the way Islam transforms these personalities, that it puts in them the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and absolutely no fear and courageousness towards anyone who is standing between them and pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now from a military perspective, Abu Bakr's goal was to gain full control of Al-Hira because it was a very central location to the Persians. And so he had sent these 3 armies, and again mentioning that these armies did not contain anyone who was from the apostates before, who had supported the apostates, and no one who was reluctant to join. And now Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu, as he's approaching the Persians, he had asked Abu Bakr for reinforcements, and subhanAllah, Abu Bakr, he sent him 1 man. So Khalid radiallahu anhu is expecting, an entire army to come or a battalion to come, but Khalid radiallahu anhu, he receives 1 man by the name of Al-Qaqa ibn Abd al-Tamimi, who radiallahu anhu was sent to Khalid, and Abu Bakr said to him that, no army with this man shall ever be defeated. And we're going to see in this battle how Al-Qaqa, really did play this huge role, of course, on top of Khalid ibn Walid and the rest of the Muslims. And so when Khalid reached Iraq, he had 2,000 with him, and then mobilized 8,000 from Rabi'a. And then also he had the support of course, Banu Shayban, and also Adi ibn Hatim al-Ta'i. And so the total number of the Muslim army reached to 18,000. And so before he rode out into that location in Iraq, he wrote to Hurmuz, who was the ruler of the border town where they were going to meet, or they were going to attack. He sent a letter saying, "Become Muslim and you will be safe, or put yourself and your people under the protection of the Muslims by paying jizya. Otherwise, you can only blame yourself. I have come to you with people who love death as you love life." And so this famous statement of Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu is repeated a lot when he sends these letters to the Persians. And this was a very, very purposeful thing, because the Persians and the Romans at this time, they had known the Muslims, and again, from their previous experiences with the Muslims, they had known the Muslims to be people who they don't fear. They're people who, even with their small numbers, they had no problem fighting these huge empires. And so there's a very big psychological tactic at play here. And this is also why Khalid radiallahu anhu, after these major battles and victories, he started to be known amongst the Persian and the Roman armies as like the sword of God, they used to call him. Sayfullah. And now Hurmuz, he had gone to the area first, and he had taken control of the water, of the river in that area. And so Khalid, he gathered up his troops, and he split them into like 2 separate flanks. and he pretty much focused on getting back this river, because again, this was a water source, and this was a very important military perspective, a very, very important tactical strategy to get control of the water, because of how long the battle would go for. And so the plan of Khalid was simple. He had these two flanks, and their approach was to go for the water source first. But before, when the armies were standing off, of course, back then they had this custom of dueling. And so Hurmuz, he had called out Khalid radiallahu anh for a duel, for a one-on-one battle, which is done in front of the two armies. And Hurmuz, he had planned with him that actually, again, this is showing, the fear, that Hurmuz is the leader and the ruler of this army, right? And he's challenging Khalid to a one-on-one, and he knows who Khalid radiallahu anh is. So he planned that as soon as he would go out for this one-on-one, that he would have an entire garrison come out and ambush Khalid and kill him. And so that was their goal. And so Khalid radiallahu anh, he came out, of course, and he was fighting this duel with Hurmuz. And as he was fighting this duel, as he was, overpowering him, and he was about to kill him, and he did kill Hurmuz. Hurmuz had sent out this battalion on horseback to go and kill Khalid before he could do so. And if we remember the name of the person who was sent as reinforcements, Al-Qaqa ibn Amr al-Dawsi, al-Tamimi radiallahu anh, he saw this happening, and so he charged out with a group of horsemen as well against the garrison that was sent by Hurmuz, defeated all of them, and then Khalid radiallahu anh also defeated Hurmuz and killed him. And so, of course, you can imagine that, the morale of the army. That imagine your leader and ruler was killed immediately in a duel in front of everyone. And then also he tried to cheat, which again, if you can look at it from this perspective, there was customs that were agreed upon and were never broken. This was considered a very honorable one-on-one match. And so it was dishonorable to break that and try to, ambush someone in a one-on-one. And so not only did Hurmuz try to do that, but he still lost, and the garrison he sent was killed too. And so the fear was so much in the Persian army that they began to tie themselves with chains so that they wouldn't hide. And that's why this battle is actually called Dhat al-Salasil, that they tied themselves, with these chains, because they feared the Muslims so much and the courage of the Muslims. And they didn't trust themselves not to run away and not to escape from this battle. And of course, the Muslims continued to win this battle, and they moved on to win this battle and defeat the Persians. But subhanAllah, when one reflects on, the different purposes of this army, what we mentioned in the beginning of this very clear aqidah perspective, that you're coming because you want to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're coming to remove the obstacles in the face of Islam. You're coming to bring the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to bring justice to these people. Versus the Persians, if you look at it from this perspective, the ones who are fighting in this army, they're fighting for the sake of their Persian king, or for the sake of to be called courageous, or for anything like this. But not only that, if you look at their societies, these soldiers were common people who did not enjoy the status of their rulers and their elites. And so if you look at it, amongst themselves, they would have fights. Amongst themselves, you may, like the Quran says about the Yahud, تحسبهم جميعا وقلوبهم شتى. And this is true for the disbelievers in general, because of their lack of conviction in the idea of why they're there. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you might see them as one, as grouped together, but their hearts are separated. Because if you put yourself within the shoes of the average Muslim in this army, this person has at stake, if he wins, to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the continuing of this, great ibadah of jihad. And not only that, but even if he loses it and he continues to get the opportunity, of course, for shahada, this high level in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But not only that, if he's defeated and killed, then he also can shahada. The highest status that anyone amongst the Muslims, from their Khalifa, Abu Bakr Al-Siddiq radiallahu anh, all the way down to the most common Muslim, all of them are seeking this position. And so when you look at it this way, Islam puts from the perspectives of the Muslim soldiers, this clear idea that you're here to gain this highest status that everyone is looking for. Versus the Persians, from their perspective, of course, the disbelievers in general, when you look at what they stand to gain and lose, what they stand to gain is maybe some status, maybe people saying that they were courageous, maybe one day they might be, appointed as commander, and then maybe one day, the common soldier might become, in a position that is leading the army, etc. And maybe if he gets that position, he might gain some wealth. Versus if he loses this battle, or he runs away, or he's killed, right? He loses life. And if he runs away, he loses everything he was working for before. And even if he wins, then the ones who are in charge of his army, they're the ones who are really gaining. The Kisra, the ruler, the one who is, commanding this army from far away, who didn't participate in the battle, he's the one who is gaining, the goods from your hard work. And so again, if you, juxtapose that to Islam and Muslims, the Muslim, he's gaining, the good deeds, and he's gaining everything for himself, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he gains that for himself, and it's not that what he's doing is only benefiting a certain class of society. And so the Persians had, attempted to force themselves not to flee, and they tied themselves up with chains, and the Muslims continued to push them until they kept, falling off like a cliff. They had nowhere to run away from, and the Muslims had surrounded them, and so some of them would just jump off, again, out of fear of the Muslims. And now after this battle, and this is a very key point, we'll tie back to what we mentioned in the beginning. The Khalid, of course, did not, radiallahu anhu, he did not go and harm like the common people in these Persian territories. And he didn't fight them. Instead, he treated them kindly, as instructed by Bakr Al-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. And he left them to their land and allowed them to keep some of the produce and fruits of their labors, except for taking the jizya. And so the ones who became Muslim amongst them, of course, they paid the zakah. And then the ones who stayed non-Muslim, they were told to pay jizya. And so this jizya, and this is a very interesting point, this jizya was less than what the Persians used to collect from those people. And then not only that, but again, just like I mentioned, they didn't take, the Persians' lands. These common people got to continue staying on their land and have this autonomy that they had before. And so, if you look at it from the perspective of these, like the common Persians who were there, like let's say you're not part of the army, and after the Muslims came in and won this battle, what changed for you now is, number one, you don't have an empire that has essentially colonized you, or essentially, like annexed you into its ownership of its land. And now you are subjects of the king, and therefore, because you're subjects, you need to pay, this number of tax, etc. Versus now, they're being treated in a completely opposite manner, where they're paying this small jizya to the Muslims for, in return, rights and, of course, protection and security. That their security being guaranteed. And again, this didn't exist previously with the Persians. And so the common people had received the Muslims in a very positive manner. That they saw them, that this was a very brotherhood-like way of how they came into conquering these lands. And again, to drive this point home, we have to remember how other empires and other states would conquer other lands. That the norm was that if an empire was defeated, or if a certain land was taken and conquered, then most of the time, the army that came in that won would come in, plunder the land, would come in and take people as slaves. That's how slaves were created at that time. They would take people as slaves. They would subjugate them economically. They would make them work for them and take from them a certain tax. And so this was the expectation that, okay, now, the Persians have been defeated. So therefore, the expectation was that Muslims would come in and do the same. But when they didn't, again, this very, very made clear in their minds the idea of Islam. And just like we mentioned in the beginning, had removed the physical barriers in place of the da'wah of Islam. And this is the key point of all of these battles in general, is that Islam has come, and this offensive jihad has been mandated upon us to remove the barriers in front of the da'wah of Islam. And so that's why we have this huge emphasis from Abu Bakr Al-Siddiq radiallahu anh and Khalid radiallahu anh in the Khulafa Rashidin and Muslims continuing on from there, of calling the people to Islam. If they accept, then they have now joined Darul Islam. If not, then to pay the jizya, and if not, then you have war. And even amongst war, just like I mentioned in previous lectures, you don't have these unwritten, whatever you do, wherever you want, and the means justify the ends. You don't have this. And so this was a huge eye opener for the people amongst the Persians, and this is why we see continuing on from now, especially in the time of Umar radiallahu anh, we see people entering Islam in huge waves when these conquests came, and not out of compulsion. They weren't forced to enter Islam, but because they saw the justice of Islam. They saw how Muslims treated each other. They saw how Muslims treated them. And when they lived under this system, they lived under this society, then they started to accept Islam from there. And so there were other smaller battles that also occurred between Khalid radiallahu anh and the Persians. And we're not going to have time to go into all of them. But the key point from this is that after this battle of Dhat al-Salasil, the Persians had pretty much been, dealt a very heavy blow in Iraq. And so Iraq was, now continuously falling under, Muslim rule. As, of course, we said, this Dhat al-Salasil, when this victory came in, the southern part of Iraq, and most of it entered Islam. And then from there was just smaller battles going up into Iraq. And the Muslims, of course, continued to win those. And with that, I think we'll stop right here. سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.